I'm Athena Z. Peters. I've been in the games industry for over 20 years now. Most recently, in the most recent part of my career, I've really focused in, there's multiple titles around it, but product management is the main thing. I also own and run two of my own companies. One's an immersive theater company, and the other is a indie game studio called Rainbow Unicorn Games. And then I do a lot of consultant work in product management. And basically, what product management is, for folks who don't understand, it's really finding that sweet spot between what are the business needs, right? So a lot of my time, I'm trying to figure out how do we make the business of our games work, right? One thing to make a game, but how are we going to make money on it to pay everybody and all of that? So I'm looking at the business aspect, but then I'm also trying to make sure that's constantly balanced with what is it that the audience is looking for, right? We can't make money if we're not building something that an audience wants. With what is it that's exciting the devs? Because that's the other thing is that, right, developers don't make a great game if they're not passionate about what they're building. And a lot of my work as a product manager is like finding that sweet spot. And so for the day-to-days, a lot of that has to do with, I do a lot of budget creation and balancing. I do team growth and communication channel stuff. Like, is all of the team actually talking to each other about what their needs are? Are they clear on what the expectations are of the product and of anybody who owns the product? So if we're being funded by a publisher, or if we're in a design house, maybe the CEO has expectations of the game, is all of that information coming down to the developers so they know how to build it? Are we making sure we're communicating that in marketing and everything else out to our player base? And then I'm doing a lot of analysis too of what comes back in. I really love games. For me, the game isn't really starting to build until we have it in front of players, even as early as like alpha. That's when things get exciting to me. So I'm all about get it in front of people as soon as you possibly can, because that tells us what we're really building. When you never know what you actually built until you put it in the hands of players, and then they'll start telling you. And so I do a lot of analysis on that, either by reading feedback or observing people playing and seeing what their natural behavior tendencies are. And also like making sure that we have the back-end data set up so that I can go in and look at how long are people playing? Where are they leaving the game? Can I go back in there and tie that into a specific thing happening in the game that's causing that exit? That kind of thing. So I do a lot of analysis on that. And then out in the market, the same thing. So what are the successful games out there right now? Why are they successful? And how do we possibly take some of that, learn it, and then put it into the next thing we're building? Yeah, that's a pretty broad explanation of what I do. I do a lot of stuff.
Now, so I guess before we touch on that more, how did you get started in being a product manager and even going down the path of product management? Like, how did you even get started?
Yeah, I originally started at games. Oddly enough, I was a theater major, and I decided that I didn't want to do professional theater for a living. But when I wasn't in theater doing rehearsals, I was playing video games. So I specifically was obsessed with EverQuest at around the time that I got into working for games. And that's what I wanted, where I wanted to take my career instead of theater. So I just started looking for places that were hiring and trying to figure out what they would hire for and how do I get the knowledge to do that thing. And I just happened to stumble on a game called Shadowbane that was actually looking for actors to go in and run live events for them.
Okay.
So that was my entry into the games industry. After that, once I was in, I just started absorbing what are all of the jobs and roles within games. And I thought originally I wanted to be a designer, right? I think a lot of us go into the games industry thinking, I'm going to write things, I'm going to design worlds, I'm going to tell these stories, right? And so I was definitely looking into that, and I did spend some of my time doing that. But I'll admit, even like my first job, I was really fascinated by the role of the executive producer, who was the person just in charge of the entire game. The guy who was running that game, his name was just, he had to make sure all the budgets were done. He had to make sure that everybody had their needs. He was checking to make sure that all of that balance I was talking about earlier, but that was his role. And it reminded me a lot of a director's role in theater. And I
Mm.
was like, this is fascinating to me. He's just really keeping all this stuff going. It took me a little while until my path got there. So I went from an actor to I did some community work of just like searching through the community and seeing what bugs they were reporting and finding ways to collate that and then reporting it to devs so that they would
Yeah.
know what to fix. That got me a role in QA. So I went and worked at NCSoft for 4 years in the QA department, which taught me a lot of just how games are built in the first place and the leadership there. I did 4 years there, and then I did land a job as a designer for a startup for a little while. And I got about a year and a half of world design work done. But the whole time I found myself still distracted by this, like the organization issues. Right. It would be like, I'm trying to get writing done, but then I'm hearing that there's some arguments about what we're actually supposed to be doing in the background. And I'm like, oh, let me see if I can help sort that. And so when that company shut down, I finally decided, okay, I need to go into production, which is another title for that kind of product management kind of merges with. So that was my next goal, was to get a job in production. So I went to work in Scotland for a company called Real Time Worlds, working for Dave Jones, who is the person who originally invented Grand Theft Auto. Yeah, and he was building a new world and a new company. And so I went to work for him, and that was my first production role. And that's really where I sunk my teeth in, and I realized that was like, this is the sweet spot of where I belong, is this organization spot. I always think about it as the game industry. There's so many talented people in the games industry. Like there's so many talented designers, artists, all of them. We have like just if you're looking for those people who are good at that, it's really easy to find people who can fill those shoes. But what I was noticing in the games industry is that we don't have really great managers. A lot of times what happens is the people who get put in charge are just really good at the job they were doing as an implementer, instead of giving them like the only path to promotion that they get is to go into management. But it's a different skill set to be a really great programmer or a really great artist or a really great designer and be a really great manager. Totally different skill sets. And so what we end up with is all of these managers who were actually not that good at being managers. And when I got into production, I realized like, this is something I'm actually good at, is organizing people, getting people to talk to each other, problem solving for them. And it's something that we desperately need more of in the industry, like people who are actually talented at it, that I was like, this is where I belong. So that's how I ended up there. I developed a lot of my skills around just project management skills in the first place. There's lots of training and books and stuff on just how to organize a project. But then people management skills. I did a lot of learning sessions and trainings on that, like how to deal with conflicts, how to resolve conflicts between people, that kind of thing. Grow those management skills. And that's really where I've continued to develop.
And kind of with the experience you have, would you say it's easier to become a product manager now as opposed to like when you first got started? Or do you think it's around the same? Like, how do you think, I guess, your job or your title, like how easy for it is it for someone to want to become a product manager or even seek that sort of journey?
I think it's a little easier now because I think that the roles within the games industry have become more clearly defined. And also the fact that we need product managers to help us stay organized and really define the business has become more understood over time. So I feel like it's easier to get there. There's also a lot of resources now in just being able to learn about building games before you even get in the industry that weren't when I was coming up. There were no game design programs at universities when I was in college. That was unheard of, right? Now, sometimes I go and teach at Northeastern for their actual game design program. Like they have an actual degree around it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot easier now because you can say right out of high school, this is something I want to do, and you can actually pursue the education that you need to do it. And I think also there's a lot more, it's become a lot more developed around being able to go out, like you can specifically go out and learn business skills, right? It doesn't have to be a game design program, but if you like go into business management, you're going to learn a lot of the skills that you need. You can go to university for project management and get a lot of the skills you need. You could do data analytics, right? There's a lot of entryway into just knowing how to put together data and analyze it that can get you into a product management role. And so there's a lot of that education that makes it easier to, once you have that, you can go, instead of having to start at like, how do I even find a job here in the first place? Like it was 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Now you can come in and say, hey, I have a degree in all of these skill sets. So can I get an associate product management role? And you're more likely to be able to like directly go in and apply to that versus having to start in like QA or community or CS to work your way in.
Gotcha. And so how do you see, you said people need product managers to be able to keep things organized and whatnot, but also at the same time, the game industry is in a flux right now. A lot of layoffs, a lot of this, a lot of that. How do you see your job continuing or evolving as that sort of change continues to happen? Things are consolidating. How do you foresee product management, just your job, like in general, moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, when industries do what's happening right now, where there's a collapse and a consolidation down, we move from relying on what hurts is if you have a very specialized skill set, there's only one thing you know how to do, it's going to be really hard to find work. Because as the big companies like cut all these roles, they're going to have less available. And then the indie companies, if you're working with indie teams are really about wearing multiple hats.
Yeah.
And so you need to know more than one skill set. Being in product management as a whole is already a blend of multiple skill sets. A lot of hats already, right? So I'm thinking about design, I'm thinking about business, I'm thinking about, I run QA tests on projects that I work on, all of these things, right? I think one of the things that's helpful about being in a product role or a project or producer, right, is if you put in the effort to get to know all of the various disciplines you're working with, and then find how you have skills that can help out in all of those realms, like it'll make it a lot easier for you to always be able to find a job or be able to fit into multiple jobs when they are available. It doesn't mean you'll always be able to find a job, but you can at least plug and play your skill sets into various spots, right? When things are lean. So like right now, right, when jobs are scarce, I've done some consulting and contracting where, I can go out and do some design work. I could go do some QA work. I could go I have these other skill sets that I've built up over time where, I don't have to rely on a role specifically saying we need a director of product management for me to go and do it. Sure, is that like a great long-term goal for me? Absolutely. Or a long-term, solid full-time job? Sure. But in the meantime, if I'm just trying to fill jobs, like there's a lot of other things that I can go and do and pick up work because I have that skill set. So I think that this role is really good for being flexible on those. But the downside of it is that you tend to not be specialist in any of those fields, right? You're a person of all trades, but not necessarily an expert in one. But in times like this, where I feel like the next few years, we're really going to see a lot more focus on indie titles coming out because the big dogs aren't paying or they've cut all their stuff. It's about, can you just go out and make a game with some other people that or can you get in with a small indie firm and take a pay cut or whatever? It's really beneficial to be able to tap into having multiples because those teams are also like, hey, I don't have the money to hire an artist and a programmer and a designer. Can you build art and put it into Unity at the same time? Awesome. Great. I don't need to get another person to do that. Yeah.
And so talk a little bit more about that, like the pros and cons, or I guess benefits or non-benefits of working with a bigger company, more of a AAA sort of situation as opposed to an indie where, like you said, there is not as much capital and all of that stuff to be able to put the things, and time is money. So if you don't have the money, that means you have to have those skill sets or time to be able to do that extra stuff. Like, where do you sit in that? Do you like prefer one or the other? Do you just like the different challenge? Like, how do you see those sort of different situations?
Yeah, so I worked at both, right? So I spent years working at NCSoft and Warner Brothers, right? So big companies, right? And big publishers. But then I've also spent the last 7 years working with a lot of indie companies and in my roles as a consultant or even in building my own companies. And so I've gotten a chance to see both. I would say like the benefits of working for a big publisher is like oftentimes the pay is going to be better. Your benefits are going to be better. The job in general is going to feel more secure, but I would not rely on that. Because the truth is that a lot of those big companies go through layoffs every year, like clockwork. It is a way that it has become a way for them to balance the books at the end of the year. So it is a regular part of business to them and not a, oh gosh, we have to do this. Instead, it's just a routine. So while it feels like you're more secure when you go and work for these big companies, the fact is you could be on that layoff list.
Yeah.
Right? Within a year or less than a year, depending on when you came in. And like you won't know. Now, the good side is that most of the time they're going to give you severance if you are. So you have a little bit of time, right, to go find the next thing. So it's a little more secure when you do get laid off. But then the other downside is that you do get very siloed into a skill set, like a specific skill set, where they'll be like, oh, okay, so you're an artist, but you can't just be an art generalist. We need somebody who's like specifically a 3D weapons artist, 3D weapons modeler. This is a very specific job. And it's like, you only do that thing if something else comes up and they're like, oh, we also need a concept artist. And maybe you're a really great skilled concept artist, but all they see is that you've done all this time in this one specific thing. They go, oh, you don't have the experience doing this other thing. But I could do it. So there's this very siloed expectation, right? On top of, but you get the security. And then you also get, it's also like great to put a big multi-million-dollar game on your resume, right?
Yeah,
that
true.
means something to people, right? People care less when I say, oh, I built this game called Litebyte that sold like 10 copies. They're like, I don't know what that is and I don't know what it means. When I say I was the executive producer on Dungeons and Dragons Online or Lord of the Rings Online, people are like, oh,
Yeah.
I know what that is. And then that's impressive. Even though I might be like, man, I put more work.
Right.
This other thing, right? And so that is a benefit of going and working for those companies, right? It's a big thing to be able to say I worked at Blizzard on your resume or something like that. But on the other side, in indie game companies, you really get a chance to stretch your skill set and find where you fit. There's a lot of more opportunity for experimentation. You tend to have smaller teams, so you really get to know the people that you're working with, and you can end up in this wonderful flow state instead where you feel like a solid team versus at bigger companies. I feel like there's a lot of tension and competition.
Do you feel like, say someone is coming into the games industry and they want to be a project manager? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Do you think that they should experience like the indie come up grind of the indie sort of situation before they even think about a major sort of deal? Or do you think it matters? Like, it's just that sort of difference that you have to balance? Like, how do you think somebody should approach it? Say they have the option, like, hey, I have this indie team that I would like to work with, and I would get this amount of experience and I'd be able to work on these many different things and this, that, and the third, versus, oh, this big company is also wants to hire me out of college or whatever.
Yeah.
And the money will be better and this, that, and the third. But like you said, they might only want me to design shirts on characters. And I don't want to design shirts on characters. But you understand that you kind of have to pay your dues. And what I'm understanding by interviewing people is that like a lot of these gaming companies, like they want you to have sold games on your
Yeah.
resume. They want to see that you have been a part of games that have sold, been successful, or whatever the case may be. So
Yeah.
do you almost think that like they should just say, hey, maybe you should try or just maybe while they're in high school, they got all these different tools and stuff now. Maybe you can probably go to these different game jams and whatnot and get that experience. But it's also really hard to get a game shipped. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, I can see
Yeah.
sort of that sort of balance, that sort of conundrum there. Like, what do you think, like, somebody should really, like, look at when they're making that type of decision?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very personal, right? A decision for everybody. If you have two job offers on the table, right, and one is an indie game company and the other one's a like AAA company, like I think it's really a matter of you need to decide what is your priority right now, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you're in a situation where you need to know that you have a solid paycheck coming in with
Mhm.
benefits. Like you're in a place where you need to support a family and they need your benefits and all of this
Mhm.
stuff. Like in that case, don't put yourself in the stress of an indie company. Go get that AAA experience, etc. But if you're in a place where like you can take a little more risk, right? Like you know that you will be able to put aside the savings you need, or maybe you don't need as many benefits right now, or whatever,
Mhm.
right? Like you're in a place where you can take a risk a little bit. I always recommend working on indie titles because the other thing you want to balance is that AAA games can take up to 5 to 7 years to launch. So, one of the things that has actually benefited me in my career to have that, like, where people are like, hey, we want to know how many titles you've shipped. I tend to come into titles, most of my career, I came into titles when they hit alpha or beta,
Oh,
which
okay. So
meant
yeah, you
I
was like
got to
right there.
launch a
Yeah.
lot. Like,
Mhm.
I've got tons of titles on my resume, but because I wasn't there at the very beginning for each one of those titles. Had I been there at the very beginning of the titles, I would have maybe 5 games on my resume despite being in the industry for 20 years, right? So like you have to
Yeah.
weigh those things and say, do I want to be able to have the experience of knowing what it's like to launch a bunch of things and really learn from each one of those experiences, in which
Mhm.
case like an indie place might be better for you, or a place that's doing live services and they have multiple games going. So a big
Right.
like this, I worked for 2 very big publishers, so that's why I got a chance to do that. And we're
Mhm.
working on MMOs, so like I had a lot of opportunity to get a bunch of titles on my list. But if you go in like for the next BioWare, Blizzard title or whatever, and you're there at the like very beginning, that might be the
Mhm.
only game you ever launch for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
If it launches. And there's
Yeah.
even the chance it doesn't launch. That's the other
Right.
thing I always have to think about. And it's
Right.
the same, just it's also the same challenge you get with indies is that game might not ever launch either.
But the time though, because
Yeah,
usually, like you say, you're not spending 5 to 7 years really on an
exactly.
indie game. So
You're
yeah,
gonna find out a lot faster.
I can only imagine you are working with a AAA and you're trying to, oh, I'm about to get this big title on my resume and whatever. Oh, the game's not coming out. Now you just
And
kind
that
of
can
like,
happen. Like I've
yeah,
seen so many people. I've been in the studio with people who worked on something for 5 years and it never saw the light of day.
yeah,
And
that's
so as far as like your resume is concerned, you may as well have just not done the
any,
work. When
yeah,
if anybody was like looking what's your ship titles, which I think is just a really bad way of the industry even like assessing whether
yeah,
your skills are good or not, because it's like there's so many things that die on the vine and it doesn't mean that you didn't learn anything from that. We learn
right.
from our mistakes all the time. But yeah, like when you're weighing that against somebody who has a bunch of ship titles, right? That's you have to think about. Am I going to
Hmm.
waste 5 years of my life on something that I won't get credit
Right.
for?
You say you already have to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things, like, but do you see yourself doing more? Like, are you comfortable with what you are doing currently? What is like your ultimate goal as far as what you want to do in your job?
Yeah. So for me, it's a lot of what I'm doing. So I love running businesses as a whole. And right now, I have my own studio. I am looking for full time jobs because my studio is not funded. I'm looking for full time jobs where I can do lead product management teams,
Mhm.
hire studio or for an entire large business platform, that kind of thing. But for me, it's definitely like product management is that building and running a business aspect, even at every level, right? So it's just a matter of, am I running a business that is just one game title, or maybe it's just one feature within a game, right? And as you grow as a product manager, you just get a bigger and bigger team, as it were, right? So you start with, maybe you're just in charge of a single feature on a game, and then
Gotcha.
you get into the point at which you're now in charge of that entire game. Now maybe you're in charge of a studio that has 3 games. Now you're in charge of a publisher that's running 20 games, right? And then it to the point at which, like, maybe you're running your own business. And I like sitting in that place where I'm running a business. I'm one of those people who likes to work with other people, though. I think one of the hardest things about running your own business when you don't have funding is that a lot of times, like, I have partners and everything, but we're all part-time because we're not
Right.
funded. I think the thing that I miss most about working in a studio is that I like having a team of people to work with, right? Okay, like, we're all in this and we're all working together to make this business, these products, and everything better. And so for me, like, I think definitely, like, I'll continue in this track. And for me, it's just getting to the point at which, like, I'm very at the point of being a CEO of either my own company or another company, to where I can just help continue to grow and make awesome games and make changes where they matter. I think one of the things that also drew me into this role and why I wanted to be a product manager was because I saw a lot of injustices happening in the games industry because of poor business decisions, and people thinking that by destroying equality and not paying people fairly, pushing people into overtime, all of this other stuff somehow made our games better. But the fact is, it doesn't. It actually makes them worse. And so I felt like we needed more managers who would speak out against that and say, no, there's a better way to do this stuff. And for me, the other key to my career is making sure that I get into and maintain a position where I get to protect the workers, right? Who are doing all the day-to-day work and making these wonderful experiences that mean so much to the world. Like, sometimes it's like we feel silly because we make games all day, but the truth is, entertainment is important to human beings, right? Play is important as adults, right? We give a lot of it up in childhood, but it's proven by many psychologists to be important as an adult. Stress relief, for creativity, for keeping your brain functioning. And for me, it's like, I want to make sure that we're continuing to think about that and not just the profit.
Do you have anything that, like, you are currently working on? Do you have any, obviously, projects that you can talk about? But yeah, just give us a little bit of insight as what you're doing currently and what you got working right now.
Yeah, in my role as CEO of Rainbow Unicorn Games, we do have 2 games. We have 1 game out and 1 in the works. So there is a game called Litebyte, Litebyte, that you can find on Steam and iOS and Android. It's great little, Minesweeper meets, like, coloring puzzle.
Okay.
And then we have another game that we're working on that's a much larger project called Romancing Jan, which is a life sim romance in a alternative history Regency world built for basically everyone. So all genders, races, etc., are equal in this world, where we all can see ourselves play princess. That is up for wish listing, up on Steam. And we're hoping to be able to develop it in the next couple of years and maybe have a demo out later this year. Litebyte's already out. Romancing Jan, we don't have a release date because that one we're still putting it together as we have time.